Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Victorious Ones podcast, the place where gaming meets comics, meets sports, meets movies, as well as entertainment. Of course, I'm your host, King Von Jr. You can follow me on social media, of course, on Twitter /X at 301 King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Twitter page at Victory Pod 1. I'm also on Instagram at Mr. King Von Jr. You can follow the show's, of course, you can follow the show's Instagram. Of course, you can follow the show's Instagram page, at Victorious Ones Podcast. I'm also the social media producer, of course, for Perfect Flex Talk Radio, hosted by a friend of the program, Mike Knox, on Mondays at 6 p.m. So of course, there's quite a bit to talk about. Of course, I want to give my review, of the recent, the release of the recent Michael Jackson movie. It was amazing, phenomenal, spectacular. I also want to talk about, catch up on what I didn't cover last week as pertains to the Mania Fallout, along with, of course, speeding time up a little bit. Of course, when it comes to this week in wrestling, and there's quite a lot to talk about, particularly when it comes to these releases. You know what I mean? So those are some of the main grounds that I'm really going to cover. I know that of course, as far as the other Michael, of course, I'm going to go into entertainment news first before I go into wrestling. I will say, when it comes to the Michael Jackson movie, it is a must see. I highly recommend it. My immediate fan reaction, I'd say 10 out of 10. At minimum, I give about a hard 9 out of 10, if you will. But this was a biopic or the Michael Jackson biopic, excuse me. The biopic was long overdue because we've had so many terrible ones to the point where the bar was low. Outside of the Jackson's American Dream, but that was a series. When it comes to movies, the bar's been really low, and that's sad to say considering who this is. But I went in there. It was so nice. Went to that theater. It was so nice. I saw that movie twice, on Friday and Saturday. I'm not afraid to say it. Both times with groups. You know what I mean? And I will say that that this is further testament of Michael's greatness. And in terms of the dedication that he put into his craft, into his skill, in terms of just to be the best that he could ever be. And I know there are a lot of people who who feel some type of way because of the fact that it didn't showcase enough of the Jacksons. But this movie specifically about his story. If you wanted a Jackson story, that's what the Jackson's American Dream was about. But this is specifically about him. That's what the movie's named after him. So it does show the early beginnings, with Jackson 5 and everything, and of course eventually it fast forwards to when he's 20 and beyond. But I mean, it's one of those things where like I said, it makes you appreciate him just that much more. You know what I mean? And it's definitely, excuse me, but yeah, like I said, as far as that, like I said, it just dives even more into his work ethic, like his psyche, in terms of just you could just feel his pain, feel that innocence that that he had, just how misunderstood he was, and it's just like one of those things where it's one thing for him to siblings to have discipline, but a lot of that was just just abusive, to be honest with you. Like I said, of course it was important for them to get out of Gary, so they wouldn't have to have to be steel mill and all this other type of stuff. But I think at the same time they had enough of that talent where it could not be denied. So the thing about it was, the dad was there to direct them, but at the same time, they had the talent to really make an even bigger name for themselves. You know what I mean? So if anything, the talent, spoke for itself. Um, it was just a matter of discipline, but at the same time, like I said, it was at the same time, like I said, that talent was just undeniable, and it opened so many doors. When it came to of course to Motown, and we saw of course we saw Glass Knight early on. I guess she was taking Diana Ross's place in terms of introducing them, and so of course, like I said, of course, as far as that, performing at that theater in Chicago, or whatever, that's when the door opened for me to go to Motown. And we saw that Lorenz Tate played Barry Gordy, did a great job. And side note, if you need anybody to to do a of course to do a biopic, he's the quintessential biopic guy, Lorenz Tate. Whether it was Frankie Lyman, Why Does Fools Fall in Love, Quincy Jones and Ray, and of course, Barry Gordy and Michael. And I like how they were able to recognize his talent. And whenever Joe, tried to be a control freak, Barry shut that down. He's like, "Look, you got this. Just make sure that that they're that you stay on top of their bookings. Other than when it comes to this here studio stuff, this production thing, leave that to us." So I like that. I like that key point. And just let him operate in his gift. There was a common thread where where they wanted Michael to stand still, but that rhythm was in his feet. He just couldn't, he just couldn't stand still. He just had to get that out. Like he just had to get that sound out, basically. And eventually got to a point where it was like, just let him have it, let him have at it, and it worked. And Barry was just amazed by the gift that Michael had at such an early age. And, the way he was able to sing, sing like that from the heart at such a young age, what I mean? With all that was in him, and he even told Michael, he was like, like, I never heard Smokey Robinson sing like that, basically. What I mean? Like, even before Barry even said anything, he had this look like, Smokey never did this. Marvin never did this. David Ruffin never did this. Even Stevie never did this. It just, like I said, you could tell by that look in his face, like that's pretty much what he was thinking. Michael just transcended and superseded so many expectations, and for him to have this meteoric rise as a child star, and then eventually, like I said, transition to to we saw, of course, by the time you get to 1978, and we, and of course, this when his nephew Jafar steps in, what I mean, and so seems staring out the window, and he's he's already visualizing how he's going to pretty much take over the world, pretty much, basically, him and Quincy talking about his next album, Off the Wall, this breakout album from his brothers, breakout solo album, away from the group, right? And so and so that so main thing, like I said, they were just just strategizing, and so I was waiting to see, and plus it's in 1978, I was thinking about the Wiz automatically because they were both in that movie together, so if anything, that's where the connection really started. And as a matter of fact, there were even people in other theaters I've seen, that videos from other theaters, like where there was even some people dressed up like the Scarecrow. I said, yeah, that's next level. But yeah, like I said, we didn't get the Wiz, but we did get the behind the scenes of of course as it pertains to off the wall, and and so so of course he got to a point where Michael wanted to be his own man, and he was wanted to be relieved of relieved of working with his dad, and so of course, SummerSlam, signed the Epic Records, and so of course you end up having two white executives, having to talk with them to relay the message, and of course they end up relaying the message, but of course Joe still made sure to have his say so, and and also side note, another thing also, I like how you know, but of course also, um, like I said, I like how even in the very beginning, I forgot to mention this about how you know, uh, as a kid, Michael, there were even these little clues, Easter eggs, if you will. Um, Shout out to everybody that's watching on Twitter, by the way, or X, but like I said, as far as that, um, there are also, these little Easter eggs, these clues of what, who Mike will become later. And so as a kid, they showed him reading, Peter Pan. And so I was like, oh, so this is where all this stuff came from, especially into the page about Neverland and things like that. I was like, yeah, this is like, just planting seeds. And there was even a page of Peter Pan where Peter is kicking, um, uh, is kicking Captain Hook off the ship. And so he writes his dad's name over Captain Hook. I was like, yeah, he's planting seeds in the long term. He was even reading the Wizard of Oz and the Scarecrow. I said, yeah, these are, like I said, I like these Easter eggs, like these callbacks. So it had a lot of great callbacks, in the movie. And so of course, fast forward back to, like I said, back to what Mike was doing. Like I said, he was doing Off the Wall, and so I like how they showed when he was doing it, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. I Can't Help It, like I see in the background, and he still made sure to be very childlike because growing up he didn't have much of a childhood. So this was his way of making up for that. And I know that people talk about how he lived with his parents. If anything, his family. If anything, if anything, his family lived with him. Because the true story is Michael. Of course, Michael paid to make sure that the house didn't go into foreclosure. So if anything, he's the main reason why they still still had a roof over their head. Sorry about that, but yeah, like I said, as far as that, um, and so of course, like I said, even with the, I like how they showed you the cover for Off the Wall. Um, I was like, he nailed the album cover, and like I said, just the success that came through with it, and I never knew that he got Bubbles that early. I thought he just got Bubbles like back in the '80s. So I was like, oh, so so this at the time, get introduced to Bubbles, and and not only that, but of course, eventually get to Llama, whatever animals that he always wanted, get end up getting when he became more successful. So of course, made up for that as an adult, and like I said, as far as that, um, and also um, just the dynamic between him and his parents, how there's a major difference, a polar opposite, as far as that, how his dad was, very controlling, rule with an iron fist, even though it seems like he's become a punchline these days, but the story about it, the story about that was, if anything was not, there was nothing punchline-ish um, about the way he was treated. There's nothing meme-like about the way he was treated, and just how his mom was just in his corner the whole time, and that just speaks volumes, and just thinking about it. And also, when you look at how powerful words can be, death and life are in the power of the tongue. I wish more people would realize that. And this was a perfect example of that. How his dad, made a joke about his nose, saying his nose was big, and that just psychologically just planted the seed in him. And that's why it's important for adults, for parents to be mindful of the words that they speak, that they speak over, over these children, because if anything, those words will either bring them up or tear them down. Words can be used um, as weapons. Words can be used, you know, um, as seeds of righteousness, or whatever, just to just to uplift. Um, and so in this case, those words from childhood definitely wounded him. So much so to the point um, where he ended up getting his very first nose job. And the matter of fact, the doctor that did it, originally he was looking at him like, I don't see a problem. There's nothing wrong with you. It's also a reminder that reminder that we're fearfully and wonderfully made. I start preaching, but at the same time, I talked about this on social media. But I gave my review. And it just goes to show that um, it's important to have more people in our corner that will give their affirmation. Because if not, if we don't have enough voices to drown out that criticism, then the enemy's going to end up using that as a weapon against us. And so eventually, because of that, it became a recurring theme for Michael. And so all Michael thought about was was what his dad said about his nose and how he needed to be more aesthetically pleasing, basically. And so so the doctor was like, all right, whatever you say. And so when Michael got back home, and he was terrified, to the point where it's just like he didn't want his dad to see, and someone he showed him, his dad was surprised, but I'm like, you're the reason why he did it. But yeah, like I say, like this, as far as your words, be mindful, be careful, because what you say can either bring life or death. So like I said, choose your words wisely. And that's a word of wisdom in and of itself. A few words of wisdom from this movie. You know what I mean? And so, so of course, even from then on, as a child, he was told to to shine his light. And as a matter of fact, Jesus tells us to shine our light, before the world, saw the earth light of the world, city on the hill that cannot be hidden. And so even when he, like I said, and so some more on that later. But yeah, like I said, as far as that, eventually, like some of course, eventually, of course, going into Thriller, that's when he decides to fire his dad as his manager. Of course, by way of facts. And so, but of course, that was just after, after him and his bodyguard Bill drive up to the Hollywood Hills. He's like, look, my dad's, just trying to sabotage, ruin everything. And so eventually, he was like, I just got, break free and do my own thing. And then fast forward to, to when it's time to start producing Thriller. Michael's in, in that boardroom, and he's at the head of the table. And he told him, he was like, if anything, I want to be the, known as the biggest star in the world. And so, he points out, the guy that he wants as his manager, and to make sure that vision comes to pass. And just the way that he commanded the room was just awe-inspiring, just mind-blowing. And so, I'm going to wrap this up in a minute. but yeah, like I said, as far as that, um, and like I said, and just to see the details that went behind Thriller. I mean, that in and of itself was just, I mean, like I said, just the inspiration, but behind Beat It, and how, and just the details behind the video in and of itself. Yeah, I knew there was real gang members, but I didn't know it went to that extent. And so he went up and brought Crips and Bloods together. This dude brought Stone Cold Killers together, put their guns down when he came to town, asking for an autograph. When the king comes around, you put your guns down, basically. That's what it was. And so to see the details behind how Beat It, how that song, how that video, came to pass, um, you know, and then for his inspiration behind Thriller, watching his horror movies, watching Vincent Price. I said, as soon as I saw it, I was like, yeah, he's about to do Thriller. This is what Thriller comes from. And what got me also was how he had these ideas on note cards and put them all all over the walls in the studio. So, like I said, whether it was the song titles, the lyrics, all that stuff. He had this stuff. What he visualized, wrote it down and put them on a wall. Write the vision, make it plain. That's exactly what he did. And he even wrote down the type, wrote down the track titles for Thriller. And so when it was time for him to finalize the album title while he was watching Vincent Price, as soon as I saw it, I was like, Thriller. So then we put the note that said Thriller, put it up at the top. He's like, that was the album title. It's like, now I see where it's going. I thought that was amazing. And so, and just the way that he was directing the video, even, pretty much directing himself, even within, the shoots. I said, yeah, this guy was a genius. And how he even was coming up with ideas at the swimming pool. And so, and my favorite line is kind of a funny line, a little throwaway line, not really throwaway, but he said, if I don't do anything with these ideas, God may give them to Prince, and the whole theater laughed at that one. But that stuck with me. That hit me because it lets you know, always be ready. When there's a vision that comes to mind, always was an idea or thought or vision that comes to mind, always be ready to act on it. Because you never know, somebody else may end up having an idea like that themselves and run with it. So suppose Michael did not act upon those visions and those ideas or those songs that came in his head, and who knows, Prince may have ended up doing something like that. It wouldn't even hit the same. All due respect to Prince, but it wouldn't hit the same, if he would have do Thriller. R.I.P. He's a genius in of himself, but that was meant for Michael, and it played out. So that taught me, like whatever you do, of course, write the vision, and and it was messed up, the way that the way things went, when it came to that whole Pepsi accident, Pepsi shooting and his hair catching on fire. I was like, I had to turn away. I almost crashed out after watching that. I was like, oh my gosh, I know it's about to happen. They kept throwing Pepsi out there, so oh no, and all for the sake of having his brothers go on tour with him. The same brothers who turned him down when he wanted to play Twister. All he wanted was fellowship. That's all he wanted. It was like, yeah, I get it. Everybody, has their own social life, whatever, want to do their own thing. But just something as simple as that, that your brother wants to spend time with you. And y'all was like, nah, we good on that. But when it's time to make money, when it's time for, to get money in your pocket, you got your hand out for that. But if he just wants to spend quality time, be like, nah, they was like, nah, I'm good. But, when it's time, for him to put money in your pocket, you jumped on that, like to be on his tour and everything. And how his dad sabotaged, the idea of having, any idea of having an off the wall tour, a Thriller Solo tour. Didn't have none of that, all because he had to drag his brothers along and risk his life over a tour, over a commercial. Second-degree burns, severely burned, and all his dad looked at was the money. All he saw in this son was a cash cow, right? But even with that, Michael's selflessness, man, said everything. Because I already know the story about about how he donated all that money to the burn center, but to see that play out in real time, right? How he ended up getting 7 figures for that Pepsi accident, and he made sure that every last quarter penny of that money went to the hospital's burn center. And to see him visit those burn victims, those children, and they really emphasized a lot when it came to Michael's relationship with kids, whether it was at the toy store, sign those toys, doing an autograph session while he's buying toys himself, right? Showing that, showing him visiting those kids at the hospital, and even when he was performing Billie Jean in Motown 25, there was one kid that was in the audience. Apparently, that was supposed to be Emmanuel Lewis, or Webster. So that kid was supposed to be him. But yeah, like I said, as far as that, like I said, I like how they did that to offset everything with those allegations and stuff, because that's what all these critics were really looking for, And so I feel like this movie was an apology letter, rather not apology, but an apology to Michael's career, his legacy, and all the pain he had to go through. And even when he was talking about, even when he was in the hospital saying he didn't want to take medication, this was an apology for that. And one of my favorite parts at the end was when they were doing that victory tour. He was singing "Human Nature," hit the world at the palm of his hand. And then, the very last night, he announced he pulled a reverse Uno card and said, "I want to thank you all for coming out, because this tonight will be our last night of the tour together." And Joseph, his jaw just like, yeah, he was dumbfounded. Yeah, he was crestfallen. Yeah, he was like, yeah, I'm going to post card on you. There you go. And I love it. Since you want to play in my face, I got you. Turnabout's fair play. And how Michael just took control of his career, his narrative at the top of his game, and the way he walked off that stage, that was his victory. And then at the end, of course, he shows him on the bad tour. So they said the story continues. So part 2 is going to go into bad, dangerous, all that stuff like that. I think it's going to be even sadder, if you will. So if anything, I give this a 10 out of 10. WWF Winged Eagle title belts. So that's my belt rating. So yeah, I already spent a good deal of talking about this, because look, this is the greatest of all time. You know what I mean? And so of course with that being said, now it is time to get into the main thing, if you will, when it comes to this thing called wrestling. And so of course, we saw, of course, I wanted to talk about some of the WrestleMania fallout. Of course, how Roman Reigns declared that he's going to be back full time all summer. You know what I mean? Especially with Oba Femi calling him out. After Oba defeated Brock Lesnar, and of course, Roman was like, "Look, I'm all game." And now you got Roman's opened up the floodgates. Now that he's become the champion, and now this belt is in even higher demand. Of course, now that it's around his waist or on his shoulder. You know what I mean? So of course, Oba Femi's was one of the first main ones to be a challenger for him. But of course, teasing that right now. You know what I mean? So I like how that happened, and of course also the night after WrestleMania, Oba, of course, declared that the ruler has arrived, and so that's all he said. And I did like the suit that he wore too. I thought that was pretty cool. So of course, yes, so of course, like I say, so Oba, like I said, of course, he definitely, just made that statement. It was very similar to how Roman Reigns did the night after he defeated the Undertaker at WrestleMania 33. He came, the night after he said, "This is my yard now," even with a sea full of booze. He said, "This is my yard now." Only difference is that Oba had cheers because he beat Lesnar. Meanwhile, Roman was still getting booed out the building after he beat Taker. And so as far as that, like I say, of course, as far as that, Roman, if anything, laid down the gauntlet. So that was definitely great to see. And also, we saw that, like I said, we also saw Rhea and of course Rhea Ripley and Io Sky team up as they defeated the Kabuki Warriors. Liv Morgan and Sol Ruka had an amazing match last week. I forgot to mention it, but yeah, it was like, and Sol definitely made a statement, even in a loss. Like I said, she definitely made a statement, and so of course, as far as that, we saw her arrival along with the arrival of Ethan Page showing up, and him and Javon Evans had beef. This is NXT, and of course we saw that All Ego had won, and of course along with the help of Rusev, and Penta came out, and Rusev put Penta in the accolade, and of course Javon definitely put Penta on notice and let him know he was still coming for the IC title. We saw that Finn Balor defeated JD McBobblehead. We also saw that the Street Profits, of course, Street Profits challenged division, for the tag titles, and so we saw that of course Austin Theory's been talking mad trash about Montez coming back, saying some stupid stuff, about because Bianca can't pay the bills by herself no more, whatever, and of course Montez clapped back and called him Timu Justin Bieber, and I was like, he just roasted me. Said he was going to turn Fresh Prince on him. That was reference to Will Smith slapping Chris Rock at the Oscars. I was like, I saw that. And the thing is, I'm gonna say it like this: kayfabe or not, leave Bianca's name out your mouth, dude, because Montez don't play that. Kayfabe or no kayfabe, you do not, like say kayfabe, like storyline or gimmick or whatever. Montez does not play at all about his wife. So I don't care if you're in the middle of a feud or whatever. Leave that man's wife's name out of your mouth. Full disclosure. Because I've seen how he has clapped back at people online. He has pretty much put the fear of God in these people. Like, like you'd be terrified to even, make jokes about, talking about Bianca saying, asking can Montez fight, and needs, of course, Public Enemy's podcast found out the hard way themselves, and he was like, yeah, I can, try me. I was like, oh, yeah, it's a good thing that they did not cross paths at Wally Mania, because, you know what I mean, you don't go there, you do not go there, you know what I mean. So yeah, like I said, regardless of that, it was funny how Logan Paul was calling people, like I show speed, whatever, calling people outsiders coming to, come to this business, and he's really talking about himself. You know, pot, meat, kettle, basically, right? Hypocrisy of it all, and of course, of course, other news, we saw that that the bloodline got reunited last week. We saw sort of Roman come out with the Usos, together, as a united front, and I like those WrestleMania Raider jerseys. I thought that was pretty cool, and Roman's first challenger ends up being Jacob Fatu, and Jacob is just locked in. He is sold. He is locked in on this thing. Full speed, all gas, no brakes. You know what I mean? Can't really do it like him, but yeah. Like I said, as far as that, and I like how Roman was just playing mind games with him. He was like, are you sure that you can handle the weight that comes with being a champion? Are you sure that you can handle this responsibility of carrying this mantle, carrying this title, being the face of the company, all this stuff, by just playing mind games with him? I mean, he just pretty much sunned him, especially at the end. At the end, we called him little cousin. I said, "Oh yeah, oh yeah." Jacob is zoned in. I don't see him win the title this soon, but he will definitely be a great new challenger for Roman, because this is, something that we've been looking to see ever since, ever since we had OG bloodline versus, the Timu bloodline. Everybody was talking about Roman versus Solo. It was really Roman and Jacob. Jacob was the main one to look out for. You know what I mean? Between him and Solo, Jacob was by far better than him, without question. Solo cosplaying as a tribal chief, quote unquote, but yet you can't even get a match on WrestleMania. And more on that a little bit later. But another thing I need to address, which I should have addressed last week, is that a lot of you fans need to just chill out. A lot of y'all just need to chill out, especially when it comes to WrestleMania and these conventions and all these events. Y'all are being really super weird. Y'all are being really super weird right now with the way you got these fans at these WrestleCon, Vegas Convention Center, and stuff like that, harassing these wrestlers, grabbing them inappropriately, stalking, Booker T when he's going to the bathroom, harassing, harassing CM Punk, Bailey, and AJ Lee, all this so stupid stuff. You know what I mean? There was even a dude that that was at WrestleCon taking a picture with one of these female wrestlers or whatever, wearing a Pornhub shirt. Like, come on, dude. Like, really? What are we talking about? What are we talking about right here? Like, I mean, I know that there are people who've been wanting to, I know there are people who want to put the blame on TKO for being cheated by security, but at the end of the day, this type of culture among fans has been embedded deeply. I mean, it's just this culture is breed. This IWC just breeded just toxicity for a long time. Breeded weird behavior, creepy behavior for a long time. I mean, this goes back to when Sasha Banks was in the company. They was being weird towards her, acting crazy towards her, stalking her, harassing her, talking about calling up the hotel to to find to find out about her itinerary, all this little stupid stuff. You know what I mean? Trying to find out where airport these wrestlers are coming through, what hotels they be staying at. To find out their hotel information, booking itinerary, all this other type of stupid stuff, to stalk them and just harass them and hound them and all this for what? You know, y'all are the reason why, you know, wrestling fans have such a terrible reputation. You know, I mean, I make these Star Wars fans look civilized. Star Wars, Star Trek fans make them look like distinguished gentlemen and stuff. Like, come on now. You know, it's downright embarrassing. It's downright pathetic. You know, you got to do a whole lot better. I really just had to get it off my chest right now. But yeah, you know what I mean. So it's just like, come on now. We got to, you know, like I mean, if anything, you know, as far as the fans, just the fans themselves just got to do a whole lot better, plain and simple. Um, and so, you know, so of course, as far as NXT, stand and deliver. Um, so that last woman, you know, stand and deliver. You know, of course, um, so of course, so um, I know, of course, last week's NXT, we saw that that Soul Worker and Zarya, had that last woman standing match, and just the way that Zarya just destroyed her. I said, yeah, this is deep seated heat right here, and I love it. You know, this is one of my favorite feuds, NXT feuds in a long time, and they definitely know how to deliver their dance partners made for each other. And so now it is time to go into, SmackDown. Friday Night SmackDown. And so, of course, it's on SmackDown. It's one of the highlights. Of course, you had Jacob Fatu chop down the Anawani tree. Yeah, so of course, on Raw, Jacob Fatu challenged Warrior Heavyweight Champion Roman Reigns. Reigns told his cousin to contemplate whether he really wanted to go down this road. Of course, fast forward to Friday, and Jacob was undeterred. He was tired of being told his limits were as there's no bigger test in WWE than his cousin, the tribal chief Roman Reigns. And Usos were conflicted about it. Jimmy tried to persuade Jacob towards undisputed WWE champion Cody Rhodes. Jey Uso himself, no stranger to feuding with Roman, had advised Fatu to bring everything he has because Reigns won't take it easy on him, and he wouldn't. Of course, you saw more unwanted members arrive for the family reunion, but they weren't exactly true to a warm welcome. So Solo and MFT's crash party. Of course, Sikoa took credit for Fatu's success. He claimed he needed backup against Reigns. And Tama Tonga tried to talk trash, but of course got a pretty nasty super kick for his efforts, set up for the main event later that night. So Jacob Fatu defeats Solo Sikoa by way of pinfall after hitting him, with a super kick, pop-up Samoan drop, and his moonsault. And something we could have seen at last year's WrestleMania, but at the last minute, and put LA Knight in there for Jacob to beat, but whatever. But yeah, like I said, of course for the Women's U.S. Championship, of course Tiffany Stratton is the new Women's U.S. Champion by defeating Julia with the prettiest moonsault ever. We saw Brie Bella and Paige defeat Alexa Bliss and Charlotte Flair by way of DQ after JC Jane attacked Paige. After the match, Laney Reed and Fallon Henley joined JC. Of course, Toxic Attraction, Fatal Influence. Excuse me. Of course, joined Fatal Influence reunion to attack the remaining competitors. Of course, make a Fatal Attraction call for NXT. Of course, Cody Rhodes offered a title shot to anyone on Raw, SmackDown, or NXT while acknowledging his mysterious puppet master was pulling the strings with Randy Orton and Cody. That had a nasty black eye. I said, "Oh my gosh, it looked even worse, than the one that Hogan had at WrestleMania 9." Like, man, something about Vegas and black eyes for the WWE tag titles. So, Damon Priest and R-Truth, the champions, defeat the MFTs by way of pinfall. after Damien hit rise up on Mateo. And so Sami Zayn, disguised as Gingerbread Man, of course, attacked Trick Williams and Lil Yachty, hijacked the U.S. title celebration with the Haluka parade. Then Danhausen defeated The Miz by way of pinfall with a roll-up after using his cursed powers to distract The Miz with pyro. And Blake Monroe and Ricky Saints, called it to the main roster. We saw Rhea Ripley defeat JC Jane by DQ after failed attraction, attacked Rhea. And so of course, as far as Monday, on Monday Night Raw, we saw that Oba Femi destroyed Grayson Waller and issued his own open challenge. So as far as that, and this is the road to Backlash, which is of course the PLE that happens after WrestleMania. If anything's the best non-Big Four PLE that WWE has, most consistent one. So of course, like I said, we saw that Seth Rollins challenged Braun Breaker for a match at Backlash. Of course, Seth came to the ring and called Breaker out, accused him of being the reason he lost to Gunther at WrestleMania, and forced him to vacate the World Heavyweight title. Before that, of course, Breaker said that Rollins used him and Bronson Reed to fight his battles. They never really needed Seth, just Paul Heyman, and that's why Heyman came out. And Rollins talked about knowing what it's like to be young in the future of the business. That Breaker isn't there yet, and threw down the Backlash challenge. Of course, Seth was calling Braun, the toughest, the strongest, the fastest. I'm like, oh, meanwhile, wow. So we're just gonna snatch that from Bianca. That's what she's, her whole thing being the EST. But I digress. You know what I mean? And so of course, Penta defeated Rusev by way of pinfall with a roll-up. Ethan Page was ringside during the match and attempted to join Rusev in the post-match attack, only to back down as Rusev stared him down. Of course, after Penta fought back against Rusev, Ethan Page returned to the ring to turn the tide before Javon Evans came in and turned the tide on him. We saw Becky Lynch defeat Io Scott by way of pinfall at the Manhandle Slam. And of course, before that, Becky just hit Io with one of the worst insults, called her the Mario Jannetty, and Rhea with Shawn Michaels. And so after that, Anna Pierce made the match official. And however, Asuka attacked Io during the match, which allowed for Becky to retain the title. And Asuka locking the Asuka lock on Io after the match. And so we definitely gonna see this at Backlash, which should have happened in WrestleMania, but last minute, they scrapped it. And more on that later. Of course, we saw Joe Hendry and Street Profits run off the Vision. Rey Mysterio defeated El Grande Americano by way of pinfall for 619. Of course, throughout the night, much focus was placed on Americano versus the original El Grande Americano, being Chad Gable, who's on the mass versus mass match at the upcoming AAA event. And the original ran to help Mysterio get the win. Oba Femi defeated Grayson Waller by way of pinfall after a fall from Grace. And Waller was, of course, beckoning Adam Pearce for an opportunity. Oba Femi interrupted him. It almost feels like Oba Femi is to Adam Pearce what what the Undertaker was to Teddy Long. You know what I mean? So if anything, if you really want to scare somebody, just have him go one-on-one against the Undertaker. So in Pearce's case, I guess just have him go up against Oba Femi. You know what I mean? So of course, like I said, Oba laid out the Oba Femi Open Challenge. They see Raquel Rodriguez and Roxanne Perez defeat Lyra Valkyria and Bayley by way of pinfall after Perez hit Bayley with the Pop Rocks. And a lot of people complaining about the way that Bayley's being underutilized and things like that. She's pretty much been diminished from what she once was, from a character standpoint. And the main thing, most importantly, we see that of course that Roman Reigns accepted Jacob Fatu's challenge for Backlash. Especially, first off, the show started with Roman Usos sitting at the table, and of course, this is eventually when they renamed the family, if you will. They discussed Jacob Fatu's challenge. Jacob challenging Roman for a match at Backlash, with Jay saying that Fatu's unpredictable, and if Reigns accepts and Fatu wins, Fatu becomes the shot caller. I was like, oh man. And so as far as that, Jake followed by saying that there have to be consequences for Fatu stepping out of line. Then we're going to see, shoot over and make his decisions later. And so yes, of course, Roman was out there. And of course, he had a great shirt, by the way, too. That I ordered that Roman 11-time main eventer shirt. That WrestleMania 11-time main eventer shirt. I ordered that, so that's gonna look great with my black and gold ones, metallic gold ones. And so, of course, you saw that Jacob interrupted Roman to close out the show. Reigns told Fatu to make the correct decision and unite their family rather than to divide it. Fatu iterated what he said the week before, that he doesn't want Reigns' title. He said he needs it before claiming Reigns was stuck in his main event bubble. And then, of course, Fatu said the Usos and Reigns never called him when he was grinding for 12 years trying to make his WWE, but Solo Sikoa did. And so of course we saw that Jacob was giving all the credit to Solo. He's the main one. You say, "I love you, Solo," and then when they feuding, when they started feuding, he was the main one who said, "I hate you, Solo," and stuff like that. It's like, so now it's just gonna act like that never happened, basically. Whatever. But like I said, of course, Jacob gave Solo the credit. He said that the Roman and the Usos, never called him when he was trying to make it to WWE, but Solo did. And then that's when Roman stopped him. He said that Jacob sounded like a fool, and that only he had the pull to get Fatu to the show. He was right. He was saying that Solo couldn't even get a cup of coffee if he wanted to. And so I figured, that Roman would be the main one who had that power to make that call. Because like I said, you can't, Solo can't be no tribal chief or whatever, running things when he can't even get a match on WrestleMania. I'm not talking about in terms of interference. I'm talking about having an actual match. Solo has yet to have an official Mania match, while Roman has the record for main events with 11. So we are not the same. They're not the same at all. Just had to get that out there, a reminder. But then after Reigns claimed that allowing Fatu to face him would be nepotism, Fatu locked him in the Tongan death grip. So that just set him off right there. So to see him bring up the Tongan death grip, the Tongan death grip, I was like, oh, this, back to the days of Ming or Haku. I said, man, he's locked in. This is serious now. He was choking the life out of him with that one. So after Jacob left, Roman grabbed the microphone and told him that he had his match at Backlash. And so there you have it. You know what I mean? And like this step, this step is setting up to be something big. And so yeah. But also another thing I wanted to bring up, before I got ahead of myself, it would be these releases in the call-ups. We had the releases of likes of Zelina Vega, Aleister Black, the YS6. I want to say Nikki Cross, Kairi Sane. That was a big one. That was just out of left field, out of nowhere. Especially since Kairi was just on TV in a storyline that has yet to be even finished. With her, Asuka, and Io, and how she was, she was constantly Asuka's sidekick and second fiddle, and just constantly tormented by Asuka, whatever. And so like that was right there on the table. They were this close to being at WrestleMania, but then Kairi gets released, and so they've had to retcon this, act like it never happened, even though on Monday, when Asuka was out there, they were chanting, "We want Kairi." I said, "Yeah, yeah." TKO didn't mess up with that one, but the thing is, I heard about Kairi, wanted to go back to Japan anyway, so I guess that solves it. even with these releases, there are a lot of them, you know, aren't really hurting like that. It still does suck, to get released, which is, having your job cut from you. Um, but at the same time, there are a lot of people whose phone has been blowing up from the moment they got released. So you got people who are getting bookings right away, immediately. Like, the floodgates have opened up, and they're going to be fine. Zelina Vega has a following that could generate her, upon millions of dollars. So she's not going to be hurt. You know, she's going to be fine. You know what I mean? And but the thing about it is that this happens all the time after WrestleMania. It's just what's even more surprising, especially is when you have people who just want television and they end up getting cut, like and you have them to scrap storylines and having to start all over, retcon storylines, whatever the case is, and just start from ground zero. And it's not an easy task at all. But they've had to make the most out of it. And but in the meantime, though, even with that, and what's even crazier is even with these releases, there are people who are still hanging around the company, like Nikita Lyons. This lady has never sniffed the main roster, but has avoided releases so many times. And people talk about how she's just starting to make improvements. Like, now you've been in the company all this time, like 4 years or whatever, and you were just starting to get better in the ring. But in reality, she's not really improving the way that you think she is, because she's been demoted from just being on NXT to being on Speed. Being on Speed to Evolve. Meanwhile, Callie Armstrong has moved up to NXT. And the thing is, Callie hadn't even been in the company that long, and she's already moving up from Evolve to NXT. Callie's going up, Nikita's going down, and you know what I mean. And so for someone to still be there with no real, no true sign of growth and progress, and just just getting by because of her aesthetic, the same Nikita that these brain dead IWC fans, favored over Lash Legend. You have some of these same fans who were calling for Lash to get fired, just so just to keep Nikita, just because they like Nikita, and like I say, these same fans are calling for Lash to get fired and saying she can wrestle and all this other stupid stuff. Meanwhile, Lash Legend is not only on the main roster, but but she got her first title in the company by being on the main roster. She just came off a women's tag title run with Nia Jax. Meanwhile, Nikita is still floundering, on Speed, let alone NXT. So she really hadn't improved like that. If anything, she's downgraded. So yeah, like I said, you have people that they're just like, you're still here for what? Meanwhile, on the flip side, at least we've seen the call ups for Sol Ruka, Eva Page, JC Jane. You know what I mean? So of course, Joe Hendry. So at least on the flip side, we still have those call ups to make up for that which was lost, has been released. So so even with that, unfortunately, that's the nature of the beast. But on the bright side, we still see more of these NXT talent shine and showcase what they can bring to the table on the main roster. And so that is pretty much it when it comes to, and of course also, of course, on NXT we also saw, you also see the eventual feud between Callie Armstrong and Jada Parker. But yeah, it's the main thing. That is pretty much it when it comes to, all right, like I said, pretty much it. When it comes to this episode, and so of course, once again, as far as the birthdays, uh, just, as far as birthdays, on of course on April 27th, we saw that Giancarlo Esposito turned 68. Iceman George Gervin turned 74. And of course, on April 29th, the young OG Javon Evans turned 22. So, of course, Michelle Pfeiffer turned 68. Of course, Holly Morris turned 55, formerly from Fox 5. And April 30th, Isaiah Thomas, basketball legend, of course, turned 65. So, of course, Zeke's got a birthday coming up tomorrow. So, of course, happy birthday to him. And of course, before I go out, I would like to say, of course, like I said, before I go, I like to give my word of wisdom is to, of course, to write your vision and make it plain, and where there is vision, God gives provision. So, and God will give you the breakthrough that you need and give you the resources that you need in order for that vision to come to pass. So always remember that you are victorious because greater is He does anything He does in the world. When you put God in first place, you don't have to worry about being in the last place. Please make sure you listen to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever, anywhere else that you download podcasts. I'm also on YouTube, youtube.com/@FarmWestVirginia. Please make sure like and subscribe for more great content. And thank you very much for listening and watching. And may this day be the absolute very best day of your life.